This is Orange Nation Overtime with Stephen Fonte and Paulie Sibilia.
Welcome into Orange Nation Overtime, everyone. Alongside Paulie Sibilia, I'm Stephen Fonte. We have made it to Friday. A lot to get to on the show. I think first and foremost, Paulie, we should mention that there is a search committee that's been put together to find John Wildhack's replacement for athletic director. 7-person committee, a lot of familiar names on said committee. John Lally, Ian McIntyre, Roxy Nurse, Donovan McNabb's wife, Mike Tirico's on the committee, among others. What do you think?
I like it, and I tend to think this is going to be a fast-moving process. I really do. I think they're going to have the new person in place before the end of the basketball season, and it will be a mutual effort to bring in the next head coach if they have to.
Yeah, I think that's I think that is fair to expect it to be an expeditious search. Still no chancellor news either, and I think that a lot of people are wondering, do those things go hand in hand? A lot of times the chancellor wants to bring in their own athletic director, so we'll see which one comes first. But that they're looking for both right now, and to your point, they all may be looking for a new head coach in the next month or so. With that being said, we did see Adrian Autry and the Orange pick up a win on Wednesday night at home against Cal. One of the biggest issues with this team this season has been consistency. Can they put it together, and can they pick up back-to-back wins with SMU in town tomorrow? Will we see some consistency tomorrow?
I hope so, and it also is frustrating because you've seen them play good against Tennessee and Houston. And why can't you just why can't you bring that back and do it?
Yeah, for sure. And they have kind of gotten away from that intense level 5 defense that we saw at the beginning of the year. Now, they outscored Cal. They're probably going to have to outscore SMU tomorrow. Cal and SMU are very similar in that they both hit a lot of threes. Cal and SMU are 2 and 3 in the conference in three-point shooting percentage. SMU second in the conference in scoring. And they both have a dynamic point guard. We saw Day Ames go for 23 the other night. Boopy Miller is just as good, if not better. Fifth-year guy. I believe he's playing in his 121st career collegiate game tomorrow. So he's been around the block, and it kind of starts with him.
Yeah, and it's interesting. In the 2 games where you had to outscore them, the opponent, Florida State, and
that's true. Yeah,
and Cal, you won them. So hopefully, maybe this is a game they can win.
Yeah, Syracuse is comfortable in a game like this. They like to get up and down, and offense was not a problem on Wednesday night. And again, they may need to outscore SMU tomorrow to win that game. We had Brendan Marks on our Orange Nation radio show this afternoon. He's a college basketball writer for The Athletic. We had him on before the season, and he was very high on the Orange. He picked Syracuse to finish 6th in the conference, and so we led him off by asking him what's been the most disappointing thing about Syracuse so far this season for him.
I think especially in the first month of the season, probably should have beaten Houston out in Vegas. I was there. I was watching that game. Obviously being able to actually beat Tennessee, that was one of the best wins of Red Autry's tenure. The complete inability to sustain momentum, and now obviously things have completely fallen off the wagon. But to me, it was you had the ball rolling downhill. You have talent. You have pieces. I mean, obviously, I know that there's been some injury issues. Donnie Freeman missing as much time as he did was not ideal. But it's the complete inability to muster any sort of momentum. And, unfortunately, I was really wrong because I thought that this was a team with tournament talent. And I think a couple of people have, sort of whispered to me over the last couple of weeks, it might be tournament talent, but it does not appear to be tournament caliber coaching.
Yeah, and along those lines, I know you released a hot seat article on The Athletic yesterday, and Adrian Autry's seat is scorching hot, as the quote was. In your eyes, what has been his biggest weakness, or the biggest weakness during the Coach Autry era through these last 3 seasons?
Yeah, let me preface just by saying that, those hot seat lists, I personally just hate putting them together because you never want to wish that somebody loses their job, obviously. But as it pertains to Syracuse, this is obviously a place with high expectations. And, now going into 5 straight seasons without an NCAA tournament berth, barring, a run in the ACC tournament later this season, not having made it any of his first 3 years in town, the fact that the team continues to get worse, to me, it is the fact that in an era where it has never been easier to rebuild on the fly and to put together a contender in the span of one off season, Syracuse has not only been unable to do that, but it continues to have these inexplicable losses. The Hofstra one, you can say what you want about the officiating. You can't lose that game if you're Syracuse. And as we've seen in a couple of places around the country, we've seen it in Indiana, Virginia last year, the 1 year that Tony Bennett stepped down, UCLA to a lesser extent. Your brand, your laundry, it means less than it ever has before. And so it's incredibly easy to slip into irrelevance if you don't seize momentum. And Syracuse for the last 3 seasons, unfortunately, has largely failed to do that.
Assuming the SU job opens up, if things continue on this track that they're looking like right now, the Field of 68 put out an anonymous poll, and it had Syracuse as the 6th best job in the conference. Does that feel about right to you?
Yeah, it feels about right. But I think you could honestly probably make the argument it's even a little bit lower now. Obviously at the top you've got Duke and you've got North Carolina, you've got Louisville, 3 teams that not only have the history but have the resources nowadays. To that same extent, I'd look at Virginia, I'd look at NC State. I think both of those are probably better jobs. And then you're sort of talking about, okay, would you rather be at Syracuse, for example, or would you rather be, this is going to sound crazy, would you rather be at a place like SMU, which has, unlimited resources to work with? Those are the sorts of conversations you start getting into. So certainly I think the history there is a huge draw. There are resources at Syracuse in order to put together a team. I will be interested to see if things continue at this current rate, what direction Syracuse goes, what caliber of coach it can land, because, I can tell you from talking to people around the industry, talking to coaching agents and other coaches, this is still a job that a lot of people covet, but certainly it is not seen as one that has as much of a slam dunk as it used to be.
How much does the resources play into a coach's decision?
It could not. I mean, it's top of the list with a bullet, not even close. And, I'll put it to you this way. When opposing coaches have, been hired over the past couple of years at different high major levels, when you call around to get a sense for, okay, how good is this guy? What's his aptitude, et cetera, a lot of times opposing coaches are not as concerned about how good the coach is. Their first question is, well, how much money is he going to have? Because if you don't have the resources, it doesn't matter if you're the best X's and O's guy in America, you're not going to be able to compete with the best of the best. And then you don't have to be, I think this is where people lose the point. You don't have to have the most money. You don't have to have Kentucky's $22 million to build the best roster in college basketball. But you have to be in the ballpark of competitiveness to where if I have this offer and I have a similar offer from your school on the table, I want to go to your school because of the tradition, because of the coaching, because of the development, because of the lifestyle that I'm going to have, because of the tradition of putting guys in the league. You have to put yourself at least in the competitive ballpark to then be able to sort of swing certain players' commitments based on, whatever your school's factors are. But money is the number one factor, and you cannot build a winning program and team without it.
Yeah, we saw that with the SEC last year where they made a concerted effort to make their basketball better, and they did. Now, if Syracuse comes open and, say, an LSU or a South Carolina comes open, can Syracuse compete with them or any SEC school?
Yeah, I certainly think so. And look, there are some people who Syracuse is going to be more attractive than any of those schools. Like, South Carolina, for instance, there isn't a tremendous pedigree of success there from a basketball perspective. LSU obviously had a lot of success under Will Wade, but outside of his tenure, not a ton of success to speak of. So, your long-term infrastructure still matters, and there is still a very invested fan base that supports Syracuse, that wants Syracuse to do well, and that you can sort of culminate that and cultivate it and make it your own. But I will say that, if Syracuse comes open as compared to, you look at some of the other jobs that we had in our list yesterday as compared to, even a Georgia Tech in the ACC. Okay, well, what are the resources? What's the difference? How about versus a school that's in the Big 12, a school that's in a Big 10, Ohio State, if that comes open? It's all about what resources you're going to have at your disposal as a coach. Again, the fact of the matter is, if a starting caliber player costs 7 figures and you barely have 7 figures, you're probably not going to be able to put together a winning team.
Along those lines, Jim Boeheim has said in the past, when you take into account NIL and the rev share, that he estimated about $10 million is needed to put together a roster that could contend in the ACC. Do you think that's about right? Is that a fair number? And where do you think Syracuse kind of falls in the pecking order there in the conference?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you guys for a fact that there are multiple ACC schools this year that are over the $10 million mark, and you can probably guess which ones that is. There are multiple that are over the $15 million mark. Now, that's when we're talking. Once you get past $15 million, that's when we're talking about, okay, you're probably in the top 10, 15 spenders in the entire sport. I think 10 is still, 10 is what I would say is on the upper band of acceptable. 8 to 10 is about what it's going to cost right now to put together a team that is capable of getting to the NCAA tournament. And, that is, you can do that different ways. For example, let's say you have a Cameron Boozer, an AJ DeBonsa, JT Toppin, one of these truly dynamic all-star, all-American caliber players. Those guys in and of themselves are going to cost multiple millions of dollars. And so you can take them, but if you're doing that, you then have to moneyball the rest of your roster. Versus if you want to, spend $1.5 million each on your starting five, then fill out the rest of your bench with guys who are making, just six figures instead of seven. You can do it that way too. So, but I would say, there are teams that have been successful this season that are under that $8 million mark. But that's what I would kind of consider the low end of, what is kind of conventionally acceptable to prove that you're investing at a real level in college basketball today.
All right. I know you probably can't give real numbers, and we've been fighting about this over and over this week. Where do you think Syracuse falls in the ACC in NIL?
It's definitely in the top half still. So that's the thing. So you're not going to be in that top 2 or 3. That's a pretty exclusive club. You're not even necessarily in that sort of next tier of the 10 to 12-ish. And quite frankly, what you've seen more recently, right? Like last year, the ACC did not invest to this level. That's why you had the turnover that you had, and that's why you're now having the success you have, because a lot of the schools that brought in new coaches did invest at a much greater extent. But Syracuse is in the top half. They are not in the bottom, 2 or 3 or third, because trust me, there are some ACC schools that are definitely not investing. They're probably right on the fringe of being in sort of that competitive landscape. And every coach will tell you that we need more and we need more. But, I look at Syracuse's roster, and again, there was a reason I picked them 6th in the preseason. I thought the pieces made sense. Thought the fit together was natural. Obviously, some of the transfers haven't materialized or taken quite the way I would have expected. Again, Donnie Freeman's injury. But, this is not a team that had no money whatsoever. Let me be clear. This is not a team that was scraping together nickels to try and buy, its 6-man. This is a team that had the resources to put together what it hoped would be a tournament roster.
And now let me ask you this. You brought it up a little while ago about the roster build. Do you prefer the way Miami did it, where they spent on 3 Power 4 guys that started at other schools, or the way Syracuse did it, where they were basically going on potential and spent on the one big guy and kept their 2 guys?
Yeah, I kind of think that every team needs a star. Stars win in college basketball. I mean, I'm based here in Durham of North Carolina. So, this year especially, I've seen up close and personal Cameron Boozer and Caleb Wilson, how many times they have single-handedly almost willed Duke and North Carolina respectively to wins. So I don't think that it's necessarily a bad fallacy to do that. You just have to make sure that the guy that you're spending that money on is the type of guy who can do that. And so, it's a situation where you can afford to do that. But the most important guys are the ones who you can get for what I would say is a market rate or a below market rate, where it's, hey, this guy is, we think he's going to be X. He might be worth this. We're getting him for 10% less than that. And then he ends up being an all ACC caliber performer. But, all of this Moneyball talk, all of the roster building strategies and philosophies, as it pertains to Red Autry, as it pertains to coaches in general, none of these guys were taught how to manage a salary cap or a payroll. These guys were taught how to coach basketball. And so I hear that refrain from coaches a lot. They're frustrated because, this is not something that any of them were taught to do, not something that any of them necessarily desired doing. That's why you do see so many schools bring in GMs to help manage it. But that piece of it and how you allocate your funds is evolving on a year-to-year basis across the sport.
Brennan, in terms of potential candidates, should Syracuse decide to make a move here and move on from Adrian Autry? Josh Schertz is obviously the hot name out there. So kind of a two-part question. Would they have any shot with somebody like a Josh Schertz? And if not, if he's going elsewhere, who are some of the top candidates that would come to your mind that might be a good fit for Syracuse?
Yeah, Josh is terrific. He certainly is going to be at the top of a lot of different wish lists. And I would think that Syracuse would be in the mix there. I can't see why he wouldn't. He's a guy who has an appreciation for that sort of thing, for history, for what a program has accomplished. So I think that Syracuse would at least be able to get him in the door and have conversations. Whether or not they can, actually land him, again, it's going to come back to, okay, what's the level of investment? And to land a coach who's going to be as sought after as Josh Schertz is, it might be a situation kind of like what we saw at NC State with Will Wade last year, where the coach has the power and says, look, I'll come, but this is going to be the bare minimum of what it takes for me to sign on the dotted line. In that case, if I'm Syracuse and I can by any means make that work, Josh Schertz is the kind of coach who's worth upping the level of investment. Beyond that, you start looking across the landscape. You start looking and seeing what are some of the other mid-major guys who are really promising. I look at like a Brian Hodgson down in Florida. I look at a Tony Skinn in the Atlantic 10, at George Mason, who's, I think he's going to be somebody who had some opportunities last year, is going to have some more opportunities this coming year. Potentially an Eric Olin. He's more of a West Coast guy, but at New Mexico. And then it's interesting to see, are there any NBA guys who want to come back? That's obviously been one of the big trends in college basketball hiring the last few years. Is there anybody with Syracuse ties who would potentially be interested in coming down from the NBA level and coming back to help their former program? So obviously the program has done that with its general manager and Alex Klein and luring him away from the NBA where he was a longtime scout. But we've seen that in coaching too. So there's going to be a lot of different options. The job is obviously going to be coveted, but Josh Schertz, you're right, is going to be right at the top of that list.
There's a certain portion of the fan base that is vehemently against bringing in another Boeheim disciple, and you just mentioned the NBA. Would you be, what are your takes on maybe a Hop or a GMAC coming back to Syracuse?
Yeah, I would say that I want a coach who has a history of success. And if that person is has Syracuse ties, if they're a Boeheim disciple, great. But I say this as someone who has seen succession plans nearby go multiple different ways, right? We've seen how this one has gone with Red Autry. We saw how one, went at Villanova with Kyle Neptune. Obviously, he's no longer there, didn't make the tournament in 3 years. I think there's a lot of similarities between him and Red's tenures. But then, like here at North Carolina, and where Duke and North Carolina are, Duke has been incredibly successful hiring a Mike Krzyzewski disciple and by empowering him and giving him all the tools that he needs to be successful. Hubert Davis has had an up and down tenure. He's very criticized here in the state, but he has won the ACC, been a 1 seed, been to a national championship, produced a player of the year. He's done a lot of things that a lot of coaches would kill to do. So I am not just flatly against it, but you cannot have that be the determining criteria. It has to be it has to be a merit-based hire. You need to hire the person who you believe is going to do the best job, because quite frankly, if you are in Syracuse's position, you are one bad coaching hire away at this point from fading further into irrelevance. And a program like that cannot afford for that to happen. And so, again, if the person who's most qualified does have ties, terrific. But you have to pick the person who you think is going to be able to compete with Duke and Louisville and North Carolina and Virginia and NC State on a year-to-year basis, because that's the only thing that matters as far as keeping Syracuse relevant, not whether or not somebody has ties to Boeheim.
Brendan, we're running short on time here, so two quick hitters to close you out. North Carolina and Duke are both on SU schedule next week. First things first with North Carolina, we saw the Caleb Wilson news. Do you have a quick update, any sort of timetable or timeline on how long you expect him to be out for?
Yeah, there's nothing yet from the university or the program specifically, but it's hard to imagine that he's going to be ready to play again for the rest of the regular season, which, again, you mentioned Syracuse next week. I'd be shocked if he plays. Obviously, in that game, it seems basically impossible. I think there's an outside chance that he could maybe be back for the end of the regular season. North Carolina closes at Duke on March 7th. Maybe the ACC tournament the week after that. NCAA tournament, I think, is where we really start looking at more likely returns. It would have been 4 or 5 weeks at that point for a broken hand. That's typically about the amount of time. The fact that it's his non-shooting hand helps, but obviously it completely changes North Carolina's trajectory without its best player.
And then last one with Duke. They're obviously very, very good. You've been down there covering them for a while. Where does this Duke team, how does this Duke team kind of compare to some of the other really good Duke teams that you've seen lately down there?
Yeah, it's not as good as last year's team, which was like a Death Star on a basketball court. I still think I was joking with some buddies the other day. Remember when Cooper Flagg missed the ACC tournament and, the NBA's best three-point shooter was just waiting in the wings to take over at 25. I mean, what a luxury that is. So they're not as good as that team, obviously, but no, they're capable of making another Final Four. Cam Boozer is as productive and well-rounded a player as I've seen in the college game in a couple of years. I don't think that they have the shooting they have, but it's a team that I put it right up there with other than last year, probably in that second tier with Coach K's last team and some of the other greats that I've covered here.
That's Brendan Marks, college basketball writer for The Athletic. You look at SMU's resume to date. They are 34th in the net, 3-6 so far in Quad 1. They've had 9 Quad 1 opportunities. Lost to Duke by 7. They've lost to Louisville, Vandy, Virginia. No shame in those losses. Did beat North Carolina, beat Texas A&M at a neutral site in overtime, and won at Wake Forest, which the more Wake loses, that's looking less and less impressive. But they've got some good wins. They're in solid shape right now for the NCAA tournament. ESPN Bracketology has them as a 9 seed at the moment.
Yeah, and Syracuse looking to be spoiler again for a second time in a row, and the ACC probably doesn't want them to do that. But yeah, and I think this game is far more important for SMU than it is for Syracuse. So I tend to think that's going to play out.
Do you think SMU wins?
Yeah,
then?
I do. I think
that goes in your
Syracuse will
prediction.
keep it close, but yeah.
All right. And again, consistency has been an issue for the Orange. We'll see if they can make it back-to-back wins tomorrow at 2.
Because if you're a 9 seed, you're teetering.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
A loss to Syracuse can put you in that first 4.
Yeah, you want to avoid that. Absolutely. No doubt about it. And they're 6-5 in conference play right now, so they want to keep their head above water in the conference. We had Tim Leonard on our show today as well. Tim will be calling the game tonight, the Syracuse-Maryland men's lacrosse game 1 versus 2. And he helped preview that game for us, a highly anticipated matchup inside the dome.
When you think about Gary Gait and why he wanted to be the head coach of the men's team, and he wanted to bring the program back, and he always wants to play the best teams and draw the biggest crowds, and really all the things that Gary has tried to get out of the program, we're going to see that tonight. And obviously this is the biggest hurdle that they have not climbed yet in terms of the men's team. Maryland has beaten them 8 straight times. You got to go back 17 years the last time they beat Maryland in a game. John Tillman is 5-0 against Gary Gait. John Tillman was hired to be the Maryland head coach when Gary thought he might have been next in line as the Maryland head coach, and they play such contrasting styles. So after the Final Four game last year, to see them this early and know that this is probably going to be the first of 2 meetings, most likely this year, between Syracuse and Maryland. It's a juicy game from a storyline standpoint tonight.
All right, for the casual fan, you mentioned that Maryland's won the last 8. You got to go back to 2009, which happens to be the last time Syracuse won a national title. The last time they beat Maryland en route to that championship. What makes Maryland Maryland? What makes them so difficult to prepare for and to handle? Because you mentioned the contrasting styles. They are very good at what they do.
Yeah, they just don't make mistakes, honestly. And you go back to watch that Final Four game from last year, Syracuse did make mistakes. And Maryland is just so disciplined. It's such a good system. I'd liken it to Tony Bennett, Virginia basketball, where they just, no matter who they have on their roster, they're going to play a certain way. They're going to be opportunistic and take chances in transition when they're there, but in general, they just want to slow down the game. They want to make it less possessions because they know they're going to be more efficient in their possessions than the opponent most of the time. So similar to kind of a formula of trying to beat Virginia basketball when Syracuse was playing them in the Final Four and stuff, I think it's very important that the Orange get off to a good start. You just cannot get behind against Maryland. We saw in the Final Four last year, they're down 8-1, and it just feels like a completely insurmountable mountain to climb at that point. And you look at the stats on Maryland, they've won 17 straight games when they're leading at the end of the first quarter. They're 139-16 under John Tillman when they are leading at the end of the first quarter. when they are trailing after the first quarter, they've actually lost their last 3 games. They're 33-32 under Tillman when trailing after the first quarter. So obviously you're going to win most games when you're leading after the first quarter. And a lot of teams probably have somewhat similar stats there. But I think that speaks to that if they get off to a good start, if they start dictating the game, if they're winning the faceoffs, if they're winning the possession battle, and they're playing at the style they want and they can control the pace of the game, you almost can't knock them off of that. It becomes very tough to come back against them.
We heard Gary Gates the other day say that this game is not the be all and end all. That either way they're going to be fine. To win this game, though, what would it mean? Not just psychologically, but from a resume standpoint, from a big picture standpoint, because everything this year is about winning a national title, right? To get to the Final Four and to win a national title. What would this game do for them as things move along if they're able to come out on top?
The biggest thing is it would make it a lot easier for them to get to the Final Four, I'd say. And we should know better than any other fan base in the country. It's very tough to get to the Final Four now in college lacrosse. Syracuse finally got back last year, but so much of getting to the Final Four is what is your seed? What's your draw? Are you starting at home? Do you have that pathway where you're playing a quarterfinal game that you're supposed to win? Or are you drawing a team in the quarterfinals that is better than you? And in general, Syracuse has been, if you look at the history of their program, when they have that pathway, when they're a top 3 seed, they usually get to the Final Four. When they're 6, 7 seed, 8 seed, it's tough to get there. So if you win this game, Maryland is going to be a top 3 team at the end of the year. And I feel confident in saying Syracuse is going to be a top 3 team at the end of the year. It feels this year like Princeton, Syracuse, and Maryland are the top 3 teams from a experience standpoint, from depth, from talent, and just the horses they have compared to other teams. Syracuse would love to be a 2 seed or a 1 seed compared to a 4 or a 5 seed in the tournament, because then you might draw Duke in the quarterfinals if you're a 4 or a 5 seed versus a team that you're supposed to beat. And getting to the Final Four is obviously very challenging. So this would really increase their chances of getting there if they got this win.
In the last segment, you predicted a Maryland win. What does this game ultimately come down to from where you sit?
I think Syracuse has to somehow be better in like the little things, the areas that accumulate possessions over the course of the game. So face-offs is going to be interesting because John Mullen has not been great in his career against Maryland. He was a little bit below 50% in the Final Four game. Now Maryland has the Vermont transfer, one of the top face-off guys in the country, that is their starter, Henry Dodge. And they've got to probably win the face-off battle. I heard Coach O say on our show yesterday that maybe if they can ride some back against Maryland, if you look at how Maryland typically loses games, it's typically when they struggle in their clearing game. And for anyone that doesn't know, riding some back is the ride is you're defending the clear from the opposition. So you're trying to basically take it away before they get it across the midfield line. If they could get to a point where they're winning some possessions back, they get more saves from the goalie, they get more face-off wins, then they're in control of the tempo of the game more than they have been in previous games against Maryland. And obviously getting off to a good start as well kind of goes hand in hand with that.
We had John O'Derna on the show yesterday, and, he said that they play this game on purpose. Obviously, they want that playoff-type atmosphere. They want to see, maybe have an opponent expose their weaknesses. What do they need to work on? And they want to see that caliber of competition that they're going to see come May because, everything is driven toward the month of May and getting to the Final Four and winning a national title. And I feel like the result tonight doesn't matter as much as just playing this game to get these guys this experience. Now, obviously, it would be great to win it, but I think just playing this game is going to be beneficial come the month of May.
Yeah, I think they need to win this game. It's important. They can't get over this hump. And
Maryland's had their number.
Yes,
yeah.
They're in the way.
Yeah, Terrapins have won the last 8 games in this series.
You're probably going to have to beat them again if you beat them this time. Right. So you might as well start your own streak.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. That's fair. You got anything for us to close out the week here?
I always love to find out your eating habits, so this is a fun one.
Okay.
It's National Tortellini Day.
Love tortellini.
You do? Even if it's a cheese?
I do, yeah.
Beef?
Yeah, either way.
Okay, well, I'm shocked by that. Yeah. So, okay, well, enjoy National Tortellini Day. That's the most surprising thing I've ever heard in my life.
I'm Italian. Of course, I love tortellini. All right.
Just butter on it?
Yeah.
No sauce?
I mean, again, I don't
You'll
eat
find
red
a way
sauce.
to ruin it.
No, I don't mind. See, here's the thing, and I know that I contradict myself when we talk about white and creamy sauce. Like, I don't generally like that. I'm okay with Alfredo.
Because it's
Like
just melted
a,
cheese.
Yeah, just a little bit of Alfredo's fine.
Okay,
Yeah,
gotcha.
so I'm okay with that. All right, we got to go. Enjoy the weekend, everybody. For Paulie, I'm Steve. We'll talk to you again on Monday. Take care.
Download the WSYR Plus app on your TV to stream News Channel 9 for free. Just go to your smart TV, search WSYR Plus in the App Store, and download to start streaming today.